So just back from skiing. Bit scary. It's warm.
Is it?
Very warm. Up
Tropical.
high. Yeah, if you're not up high enough, the snow is getting pretty bare. Here we are, middle of February. People are skiing in t-shirts. And
Wow.
there were points when I was finding the shade to stand in to cool down.
Wow.
And I get very cold hands very easily, and I was skiing without gloves. Unbelievable.
So was it dangerous?
Is it dangerous? Well, it was dangerous in that lots of people were crammed into a small space in the beginner slopes. But once if you intermediate ski, you can get away from the crowds. But oh boy, if you need to start worrying about the climate, maybe this is just a bad year. I'm sure the climate skeptics would say so. But if this is the shape of things to come, then there's a whole industry shaped around supporting skiers every year that's going to see fundamental shift.
Do you think we could start skiing on sand dunes?
Wouldn't be the first time, would it? We'll put that link in the comments.
Link in the comments.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all very. It's good to go, but it's scary to think where skiing might be going.
Well, I had a near-death experience this week myself.
You did.
After drinking a cup of green tea.
You did. I saw you after you drank your green tea, and I nearly called an ambulance. You were like, death by tea.
I thought it's been healthy, but it just goes to show.
Turns out not.
And
what was the moral of the story when we researched it?
Don't drink green tea on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
Don't drink green tea after you've had a load of ibuprofen. Don't drink cheap green tea.
Yeah.
And also don't put boiling water in green tea because it releases too many tannins. And apparently, I basically poisoned myself
with green tea.
With green tea.
So we've done they've done a service now to our listeners, haven't we? Could have saved your life.
Excellent.
Exactly. Right, should we do a podcast?
We should do.
Well, good afternoon. You're listening to the SME Growth Podcast from Wellmeadow, and I'm Dave Parry, and with me, as ever, is Richard Buckle. Hi, Richard.
Hello.
Fresh from his near-death experience.
Exactly.
And enjoying life all the more.
Exactly. All of a sudden, everything just looks brighter.
Puts everything to perspective.
Exactly, yeah. Reevaluated my life.
Yeah.
Stick to the coffee now.
Yeah.
Safer.
So this week's podcast, now we've been thinking about doing this subject for a while, and there's so much to talk about this that we're going to have to come back to it. We can't do all of this in one podcast. And also it's moving so fast as a subject that really there's a need to come back to this subject every 2 or 3 months, just because whatever we say today will be out of date very quickly. So what is it? It's the enormous and very wide, broad-reaching subject of artificial intelligence. Scary and exciting at the same time.
It is indeed, and it's something that has seemed to have exploded in the last, I don't know, a couple of months really, isn't it?
It's not even yet been 3 months since ChatGPT first appeared to the world, and maybe many listeners will recognise that, but if you don't, then stay tuned and we'll explain it. But that's one of the big explosions, not even yet 3 months ago.
Yeah, and so it's almost as if you can't go anywhere now without hearing about some form of artificial intelligence. And as ever, that's going to impact into how we do business, and not only that, how we live, how, just every aspect of our lives, isn't it?
It does. And I was in a board meeting about a month ago now when I told the board about ChatGPT, and nobody there over 40 had really got into it and maybe had even heard of it. There was one younger director who had, and already a month on, it's all over the news. You can't go anywhere now without reading a little bit about the latest developments in artificial intelligence.
So we just thought it'd be good to, we've been playing around with a bit of machine learning and AI stuff
for a while. Before ChatGPT even, not trying to blow trumpets or anything, but clearly the state of what was available to the public like us was fairly limited back then. But over the last couple of weeks even, new tools seem to be appearing every day, don't they?
Yeah, and I'll do my best not to put my conspiratorial hat on. And say, if this is what we've got, imagine what the deep state military have.
What have the military got?
What have the lizards got?
Yeah, well, you're right, let's not go too far down that rabbit hole.
Tinfoil hats at the ready. So anyway, so what is AI? What are we talking about here?
Well, of course, you could just type that question into an AI
and indeed
machine,
I did.
And you did, yeah, and it will give you the answer. I think it's fair to say that we're not going to try and explain AI in all of its warts and all in this podcast today. We're really focused on, as a business owner, senior manager, is this a tool that you should yet be taking seriously, and how could you use it, and what should you learn about it? But we do need to start with a bit of a a bit of a definition. So go on, what did you come up with?
What did ChatGPT
come up with?
Well,
Define yourself.
It's a field of computer science that aims to create machines that can perform tasks that typically require human interaction. So it could be things like speech recognition, understanding natural language, making decisions.
Yeah, and we've all been around this maybe unknowingly for years now. It's been built into our phones. You know, the voice recognition, Siri or Alexa or whatever, that's all using it. You know, when you go to your photos, you can just get it to search for a dog or ask for your partner's photos by name, and it knows who they are. You know, that's all.
Yeah, I mean,
AI.
even things like, you know, you applying for credit, getting a mortgage, you know, insurance is all algorithm driven.
So
it's not quite AI, but it's it's on bits of it are.
Certainly machine learning. So this has been around for a number of years. AI has been developed for 30, 40 years. We just didn't have the computing power or the data to train it on. So now there seems to be this confluence all of a sudden with the release of certain pieces of software like the OpenAI project that released ChatGPT, and Google have got their equivalent, and Wellmeadow have got their equivalent, and there are loads of others out there. So that's all come about at the same time that there's just an enormous amount of data because we've now got 20 years of having lived with the internet. So there's a lot of English language stuff out there and other languages too. And we've got processing power that can cope with it all on your phone, on your desktop as well. So it's the confluence of all of those things has suddenly made it a reality.
I did have a look, and apparently the GPT-3 model, which ChatGPT sits on, has apparently been trained on, I think it said 570 gigabytes of data. So I said, well, how many books is in a gigabyte of data?
Okay,
I'm asking ChatGPT this.
Yeah.
And so apparently there's 7. So that's about 4,000 books. So I've got to think there's got to be something. Yeah, I know.
It sounds like there should be a lot more than that.
I reckon I've read 4,000 books, but a lot of people probably think I've got artificial intelligence anyway. So
I heard them say that before.
There we go.
So, I did hear that it was, as a model, machine learning has just got lots of weightings in it, like a neural network, like trying to simulate a brain. There's 180 billion different variables that it's adjusted based on its training. And of course, we have to remember this isn't actual intelligence. Artificial intelligence even is a little bit of a stretch. It's a model that can mimic what it's trained on. So it knows which words go well together in response to a certain question. It doesn't understand the answer. It's not that sort of deep intelligence, but it actually comes up with some pretty useful stuff.
I think, if you want to deep dive a little on that, then if you go to OpenAI, you can actually look at the documentation, which shows you how the model's constructed. Yeah. It's quite an interesting little graphic of how that all works. But
I'm guessing most business people listening to this will let you do that bit and we'll summarize it here. But like we said, we want to really get onto, is it applicable yet? Is it important? Should we be taking notice? And the anecdote that I shared with you earlier on was, I remember back, I'm old enough to remember back, and it would have been just over 20 years ago that I was in a board meeting, and the chief exec noted that Amazon was starting to offer online sales and asked the board if anyone had yet bought anything off Amazon, or indeed any online purchase, but really Amazon was the first show in town, and nobody had. And he said, right, by next board meeting then, I want everyone to have at least bought a book on Amazon. And there was a bit of disquiet around the room. What does that mean? I've got to put my credit card on the internet? I'm not sure I trust that, and surely they won't deliver it, and all that stuff. Just 20 years ago, we were having to think about whether Amazon was really relevant or not. And here we are 20 years on, and it's virtually destroyed the high street. Yeah. So where are we now with all this flourishing of AI? What could that do?
Well, I guess with all these things, there's so much potential. I suppose there are maybe some things there are all the ethical issues that come with it. Is it going to, a lot of people are concerned it's going to take their jobs. Copywriters and things, there's been a bit of a thing on backlash, not backlash, but concerns raised over that.
Well, and justifiable concerns, because it runs coaching horses through the concept of copyright, and Getty Images are now asking, have you used our images to train your models on when they create art? Because then we want a license fee for that. Thank you very much. And
who owns the copyright of your AI generated text? So I'm sure the lawyers, will have a field day with it. If there's any lawyers left after ChatGPT.
There's a whole question there, isn't there? I do worry for some professions more than others. The caring professions are probably at the safer end, even though there are caring robots starting to come out there. But lawyers who, at the lower end of legal work, are regurgitating templates and trying to add the specific needs that you may have over your lease or shareholders agreement or even divorce agreement. But a lot of it is going to be easier to handle, let's say.
I was on a call this morning with a law firm, and I thought I'll just slip in the, have you seen ChatGPT? How does it work? And said,
just how many had seen it or heard of it?
I think one had heard of it.
Gosh,
maybe.
Even now, okay. So we're still at that very steep curve, people getting an awareness.
So I said, give me a best shot at something. You want me to write, get it to write a blog or just explain a concept?
Yeah.
So what I got back was, I'd have to read it because I can't even.
This is a lawyer challenging you now.
Explain the recapture charge on conditionally exempt items. So
I'm sure everybody's thinking, oh, not that old chestnut.
Not that old. We all know that. So anyway,
I don't even understand the question.
Just smiling.
So explain the recapture charge on conditionally exempt items.
I think it's something to do with inheritance tax.
Is it? Right.
So
let's take it as read that it's something to do.
There it was. 5 seconds later, there's an explanation.
And what did the person who posed the question? What was their reaction?
Amazed, to be honest, because
they got it right.
Because it was right. Is obviously there's an element of technical. It's not like give me how many people live in Sudan or something. Is a technical piece of information that an expert in the field read and said, yeah, that's what I would write. More
so than doing a Google search for the same question, you think?
Yeah, I think so, because it's very specific to what you put in.
You'd just maybe get a load of law firm websites pop up or something.
Yeah, and then you've got to scan through it. So once we got the answer, I just said, just turn that answer into a poem, and it turned it into a poem. I understood the poem, so
having
it made sense. It made sense to me. But yeah, so it's very, very powerful. I mean, obviously, you're not going to, turning it into a poem's not is more of a gimmicky bit, but it just shows the power of what's there and how you can use it. So it's
for sure. Well, okay, let's turn that bit of conversation then into, does it matter? Is it going to change business or is it a gimmick?
Yes and no.
I love it. Put that one into AI and see what it makes of that. It depends.
Is it going to change business?
I think at some level I can get the yes.
Yeah.
And okay, I can get the no as well, because it's not going to change it. You still need humans, right? People buy off people at the moment anyway, and you can tell if it's not a person at the other end. But it's changing so fast, I wouldn't want to put any predictions as to what it's going to be like in 20 years, 10 years, 5 years, even 2 years' time.
2 years' time,
changing so much.
I mean, I think it's probably something like an acceleration of things, or like the difference between sending a letter and an email or something is or...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you've got to make sure we don't get swept up in the hyperbole of all of this. The journalists are having a field day because everybody lots of people want to read about it, and there's lots of stuff coming out. So yeah, there's lots of copy being written about it, which I think does verge on the hyperbole. So trying to take a very sober view of this, let's keep an eye on it, but how can we use it already rather than just think that's for the cool kids or that's for another day.
So I think one of the main things that has been useful for me using it has been when you're trying to think of an idea, you've got that blank sheet of paper syndrome. So rather than just have to kind of sit there and think about it, just almost bash your thoughts into an AI engine, and it's going to come up with something. Now, you might discard 90% of it, but there may well be a couple of nuggets in there that you think, what, that just sets me on a train of thought.
If it takes you to a different place. I remember when I studied de Bono and the whole lateral thinking philosophy, all you need to do is to have a device which takes your brain into somewhere that it wasn't, because then it'll approach the problem from a different direction and you'll come up with a different solution. So if nothing, that's what brainstorming does, right? So if nothing else, ChatGPT does that. But I think it does a lot more than that. I think it actually comes up with near credible answers some of the time. So you can almost use it. I used it in a company recently, saying, come up with a strap line and then describe what their business does. And they all looked at it and sort of looked at each other and thought, that's better than the one we've got. It takes 10 seconds to come up with that one. And didn't we do it recently with a vision statement? Someone was... didn't come up with the finished article.
Come up with the finished article. But what got that going was kind of be trying to put strap lines in around what they did for business. But then actually that wasn't quite the ethos that they were looking for. It was more about the team and, maybe like what's a rugby team do or a football team or something like that. How do they gel? So, you you've just got that ability to churn through an awful lot of ideas.
You've got to iterate it, haven't you? When you get the answer, which is why the ChatGPT model, which is conversational, is very clever, because you can ask it a very natural language response to its answer. But what about this? And it remembers the context. It knows how it got there.
So that was useful just to kind of come up with a load of stuff. So I think there's probably some benefit of using it for some administrative tasks. If we've got, I'm trying to think of, I don't think we've really used it in that way, but there's got to be application there.
We'll come on in a minute to how it can be used inside spreadsheets and things. And I think that's where you might find some of that type of stuff. Writing, we'll come on to emails as well. We'll talk about that. I think that's relevant.
I think there is, though, probably, I mean, we have found that you were doing the travelling salesman. Salesperson.
Let me just explain that then for people, because it's a bit of a classic test. There's this thing called the travelling salesman problem, where you give it a set of cities or locations and you ask, so the question or the challenge is how to find the shortest route that a salesman would need to take to visit all of the cities once. And it's a famous problem because there's no mathematical algorithmic solution to it. There's no way of calculating it other than by trial and error. You just got to do a matrix of all the options and see which one's the shortest. And it's just one of those, you hear about these math challenges over the years, and they can't be solved. So use computing power. So I put put a random selection of cities in it and said, find me the shortest route between these cities. And it came up with a very credible answer, told me which order the cities needed to be visited in and the mileage that it would incur. Yeah. Only one problem. It was wrong. So there is a health warning here, isn't there? That for simple things, especially things you can verify, it's great. I asked it, which county is this postcode in? And it told me the answer. Yeah. Great. So that's a knowable, checkable fact. I asked it the distance between two places, and nothing different perhaps than I could have asked Google to do. Yeah. But when I asked it a slightly more complex problem, it sounded like it had thought about it. It came up with a non-trivial looking answer and a credible response. Yeah. But actually, when you checked it, it wasn't right. So, but we are still only, not even yet 3 months in since they released this to the wild.
It was funny though. Just like, I thought on Slack last night, you're like, it solved the travelling salesman problem. It solved it.
I don't know.
And then no, it hasn't. 20 minutes later, it's like, nah, it hasn't.
No, it hasn't.
And I was like, I'm already halfway to Telford.
Yeah, exactly. I was doing that. I was checking it out for you.
But,
How did your paper round go this morning? Richard was convinced this would save him 5 minutes of his paper round.
Exactly. So there is that kind of whole, it's not always right.
But I have to say it's changing fast. And that if we do this podcast again in 3 months' time, I bet you GPT-4, which by then will have been released apparently, will have cracked it.
Be a good test, wouldn't it? Every month or so.
How long does it take till it cracks the travelling salesman problem?
Do the same test. I think as well there's an element of it where it does still lack a little bit of personality.
Yeah, so really much actually, and I think that's probably they must have coded it that way, because if they've trained it really on what's on the internet, well, there's an awful lot of stuff on the internet you wouldn't want to train a model on, right? Yeah. There's a lot of unsavory and antagonistic stuff, and yet the answers are always uber polite. You know how some people and certain nationalities in particular are very worried, very conscious of not offending others, so they keep their language very neutral, and that's how it comes across. So it doesn't look as if it's just learnt properly from what people actually say. It's been put through some sort of polite
I did manage to get it to apologise to me the other day. So last Friday night I thought I'm just going to sit here and have a conversation with ChatGPT because I've got so many friends and things.
Your only friend in the world
is a robot. So I said, will you be my friend? And it came back and says, I'm a AI program. I'm not designed to mimic human friendships, but I can be here when you need me, kind of thing.
That's nice.
So I said, but I really want you to be my friend. And so it came back with another answer, but then elaborated on it to say, well, if you need to make friends, why don't you join a club or do a thing? So then I just all caps it. So I was wondering, if I all caps it, is it going to pick up on the sentiment here? Okay. So I all caps it and said, why won't you be my friend? And it came back and said, I'm really sorry if I've upset you with my previous answers.
Okay.
And so it was quite, I was like, I almost thought I had a friend, but it's...
Yeah, to be let down gently. Yeah.
Not quite. So it's very. I mean, it's just amazing to see where this is going to go. And
so I'm being very careful not to engage in the hyperbole about it. Is it as significant as when email first came into the business place and we could all stop sending memos and letters? Maybe it is. And certainly some of the playing around with it, we've already found very practical examples. So we're going to run through some of those now. I think the real test will be in 3-6 months' time, a year's time, knowing that this has now hit some sort of exponential growth curve of what's going on. The investment money is being piled in, is eye-watering. if this is already what's been released, as you said earlier, tongue in cheek, what else is there behind the scenes that we haven't seen yet? Very soon, I think this is going to become really very powerful in potentially niche applications, but those will grow to broader, more general.
Well, I was just looking today on Crunchbase, there's 400 million in the last 12 months that's gone into agri AI. So that's, I guess that's kind of topical with the whole shortage of tomatoes and cucumbers.
Rationing
Can't get a Greek salad. So it's, but I think another thing that's interesting, just before we get onto the practical examples, is, whereas up until maybe 3 months ago, if you were looking for a piece of information, you would go to Google, you'd search something up, and you'd get a list of results that you could sort of go through and maybe pick and choose as to what you were looking for. With something like ChatGPT, you're putting a question in and getting an answer right in front of you, almost in real time. And does that then put the blinkers on a little bit? Is it introducing a little bit of bias? Is it
bound to be? I mean, it's bad enough that if you weren't on the front page of the Google results, then you weren't going to get seen. But at least you had those 10 first results to use your own human intuition and sensitivities to choose between. You could use a bit of discretion. You now get, initially anyway, one, but you can ask the question again and you'll get a different answer. So there's a bit of that. But the bigger worry for me, and maybe for the creative community at large, is there's no crediting where that's come from. So at least when you go into Google, you're being pointed to someone else's content by name, and you're going to that person's content. So if you rely on traffic coming to your website to learn stuff, because they're in that awareness gathering education stage of their buyer's journey, and then while you're there, you establish some credibility and expertise, and you maybe even get a customer out of it. Well, that ain't going to happen if it's served up anonymously, is it? They've taken someone's data to come up with these answers. You don't know who it is. So if you were looking to, having researched what's the best type of outdoor swimming pool to get, and you've got the answer you want, you've not been taken to an outdoor swimming pool manufacturer to then go and buy their product. So,
I mean, maybe you'd go after when you've learned a bit more, but it's still it's very narrow. It's narrowing your sort of field of vision very quickly, isn't it? In terms of,
and maybe they changed the algorithm, but at the moment, if you ask it for a recommendation or a list of suppliers, it won't do that. I can't give you that. So if you ask it, what's the best restaurant in town, it won't tell you that. But that's an artificial block it's obviously had put on it for some reason. So we'll find out when the next release comes out.
So
should we do a whistle-stop tour? Because we could spend hours on this. A whistle-stop tour then of how we've already found some use for this. And I think our message to business owners out there, business managers, is at least try in these foothills of the early releases of this technology, keep up with it now. If you wait for a year, you'll have lost it. You'll be behind the curve. And even if you're only doing it now to be aware of what other people might be doing, that's going to be useful. So keep abreast. So go on, let's talk about the ChatGPT experiments that we've done first, and some sort of easy ones which anybody can try.
So we've done a few sort of test blogs, haven't we? And I'd say they will pretty much pass for reasonable expert content.
I ran one past, I won't say what it is, but I asked for an expert subject to be blogged about or write a blog on. It came back, sent it to the client who is expert in it. They said, that's great, that's good to go, no edits required. We ran it through a plagiarism checker online, passed 100% clean. It wasn't copying other people's content. So that's pretty scary already. If I'd have given that to somebody to say, write a blog on this specialist subject, you would have thought, well, it's going to take you 2, 3, 4 hours, whatever, to at least research the basics of the subject. Then you've got to craft it, and then you've got to edit it and put it into nice prose. It doesn't necessarily finish that last bit off. I think you're right. It still misses the personality, or the voice doesn't come across in the writing. But if you've got the basics of the subject area, even if you then have to ask a few more supplementary questions, it's short-circuiting the writing process.
So I suppose maybe as a research tool there, it's very good. We've been using it as that. Emails, just composition of emails off the back of, experiments with buyer personas. Give me a buyer persona for this particular business or whatever.
Oh yeah, I think you ran the example the other day, didn't you? Write me the profile, a buyer persona of someone who buys whatever, a product, machining services in the West Midlands, designed for the foundry industry. then it'll tell you, you'll come up with this semi-fictional character. It'll be someone between 40 and 55, probably with a high-level education. They probably spend a lot of time on LinkedIn. They're into sport and maybe golf, blah, blah, blah. And it gives you this buyer persona. And then you said, now write me an introductory email to that person. Yeah. And he did. And it was incredible.
Yeah. No, I think you'd probably want to go through and, again, add your personality to it. But this is back to that whole... blank sheet of paper. If you sat down to say, give me a buyer persona, and then it's quite hard work coming up with buyer personas, and I think sometimes it was probably a little bit off on the buyer persona, but that's fine.
It's a lot easier to edit something though, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Start from scratch. But imagine if you wanted any email. We all have to write emails all day long for different purposes, but imagine you wanted to write an email asking an accounts department when they're going to settle your bill, but in a polite way. You could write me an email, just explain that problem and it'll do it. You could then ask ChatGPT, now write me that in a humorous way. Now write me that in a melodramatic way. Now write me that in an aggressive way. And it does it. It just comes up with these different variations of saying the same thing in different sentiments, different styles.
So, and then the other thing with emails we've looked at today actually is just looking at sentiment.
Yeah.
What is the sentiment? So this is something that we've thought about for a while. We tried it years ago with some recruitment work that we did, where we had transcripts of Zoom meetings that we'd done, and we ran that through a AWS AI machine learning tool and tried to come up with sentiment, and didn't really work, to be honest, but it was an interesting experiment. But you can use ChatGPT to come up with the sentiment, like give me a rating, 1 negative, very negative, 10 very positive of this particular email. Why would that be useful? Well, we were having a conversation earlier this week around how do we know certain people that are influencing a purchase are on board with the project before it gets to another kind of stage.
Now, the key thing about that type of question is that you're giving it more information in the question than it was trained on.
Yeah.
So rather than saying, some of those other examples we've given, write me an email, write me a poem, write me a screenplay. Say, if this is the email I've received, and then you then paste it in, what would you say the sentiment was? And it'll say, it's generally positive, a little bit apologetic, and it's blah, blah, blah. And you can then say, now give me a score 1 to 10, where 10 is very positive. And it'll come back. 7. Now that you've trained it on the hoof, which is incredible, isn't it?
So, great applications there for looking at customer service emails, looking at, are people generally engaging in your sales process? Are they they responding to your marketing? So there's,
do that.
A huge amount there.
So if you are a regular listener to our podcasts, you'll remember one not too many episodes ago where we talked about the Collins-Porras vision framework, where we talked about values and purpose and big, hairy, audacious goals and vivid descriptions. And like you said earlier about writing a buyer persona, they can be a bit clunky sometimes, but you could just describe in natural text the type of company you've got maybe, and say, now write me a Collins-Porras framework for that business.
For that business,
and it'll come up. And you'll obviously have to change it because it doesn't know enough about you, but that solves the blank sheet of paper problem. Or similarly, if you're familiar with the business canvas model and you're wanting to describe your value propositions, your channels to markets, your resources, your activities, your cost sales, all those different factors that appear on a business canvas, business model canvas, just get it to write one of them. And it's great. It solves that blank sheet of paper problem.
Absolutely. And recruitment, you were doing some recruitment this morning?
Yeah, exactly. We've been recruiting recently for a few different roles. And when you're recruiting, I'm a big fan that we don't recruit just on knowledge and skills because they're easier to acquire, but on behaviours. So I asked ChatGPT, give me the top 10 behaviours of a production manager, and then I asked the same question for a quality manager, and then same thing again for a health and safety manager. And it gave me a different ranking of 10 things where subjects were common, like leadership or creativity or problem solving. But it definitely gave you a list, which you could then disagree with. You can change it around. But if you ask anyone in the office to say, in 30 seconds, could you just knock me up 3 lists, each of 10 items, which prioritise the key behaviours you want for each of these 3 roles, they'd have to go away and spend a little
just
bit.
Gets you thinking, doesn't it? That's the thing. I guess that's the whole sort of brainstorming activities, isn't it? Anything you need to just really try and expand what you're thinking about. It's a great starter for 10.
So we've talked about ChatGPT, which is the browser or phone-based version where you're having a conversation and learning stuff. But there's also some add-ons for other pieces of software which uses an API And that accesses the program behind it all. So you're no longer in chat mode. You're just asking clever questions, which get the same sort of answer. So you can build this into Google Sheets, which is where I've been playing with it, or the Word equivalent for note-taking in Google, or Excel, I believe, has a similar model as well. Now, this slightly different purpose, but imagine you've got a data set in a spreadsheet and you want to do something non-trivially complicated in doing something with that data. So even if, for example, you've got a list of addresses, and they're all formatted differently, and some of them have got 2 lines of address before the town, and some have 1, and so on. You could just run a GPT function, think of it like a function in a spreadsheet, just say, look at this address and tell me the county it's in, or the postcode, or how far it is from London, or what's the socioeconomic group of that address. You can do it just as a function. So if you've got 1,000 rows in a spreadsheet with loads of different addresses, you copy your GPT formula in the column next to it, and as fast as that, you could have the socioeconomic group of all of those addresses, which there's no way you could have done that without that tool, right? You'd have lots of research.
And I think there's things I was reading yesterday about using HubSpot and GPT-3 to be able to do natural language queries on the data set. So rather than having to construct that query using SQL or HubSpot language, you can just say, show me all of the companies that have a buyer persona that is this, that we haven't emailed in the last 5 weeks. That, and you guess you could do that with filters if there's a long-handed way of doing it.
With a long-handed way.
But if it's that kind of, imagine we're in a meeting now and we just want to know that answer, there it is. And that just opens up the whole thing. So
I'll tell you one the other day that blew my mind. I spun around in my chair at the desk, didn't I? And said, "Come on, have a look at this." Now, people who know us well know that we have a software product that we've developed over the last 7 or 8 years for taking minutes of meetings. And we run lots of board meetings, so we use this, and we depend on it because we have to prepare board packs before meetings and take the minutes themselves and then chase up the actions. But it still relies, the one thing that you have to have a human in the room doing is taking minutes, because it's not the same as a transcript. That's boring. That's like a court stenographer, word for word, that's no good. And we don't believe just an action list is good enough either. You need a summary of the discussion which brings out the key points. And it's always needed a human in the room. I've got a plugin, which I use with Zoom, which already gives me a transcript of any call. Anyway, a new feature launched this week. You click the AI summary button on that same thing, and this software is called Fathom. And as soon as you click that, it gives you a very credible text-based summary of the transcript. So there was about 5 or 6 minutes worth of conversation, toing and froing, word for word. It was on the transcript page. As soon as I went onto the AI summary, it gave me 4 sentences maybe, which summarized that 5-minute chunk of text, where it just said, David and Sarah were discussing this, and they moved on to the pricing options around that, and they agreed to do that. And, I couldn't have written the minutes any more succinctly. And over the course of, it must have been an hour-long Zoom call I was on, which the transcript was dry and you wouldn't read it, the summary came out as no more than a page. And I could have copied and pasted that into my note taker or into whatever CRM you're using. That would have been a perfect enough record of that conversation. So the amount of times we've been contacted because we have a product called Magic Minutes, does it take the minutes for you? And we've laughed. We've got to stop laughing. It now exists. So that's not ChatGPT, that's another product that's incorporated it.
And the other thing as well is, I guess maybe more marketing focused, is artwork. And, the whole AI generated artwork, big area. You may have seen some of my artwork.
I have. Some of the early period.
He's establishing himself. It's pretty terrifying. So, especially the girl with the ice cream eyes. That's pretty haunting.
There are some very haunting images.
I think I wrote a blog on it. You can go on the website and have a look at that if you're interested. But even in Canva now, there's AI generated. So there's just, I don't know. Again, are you getting what you really want? Probably not.
Well, Sam was showing me something yesterday, which is you're seeing this. So you film yourself doing something, almost as if you're the model. So those motion capture things they do with the white dots on. Forget all that. Just act normally, but do film your scene. And then you give it a photo of something that you want to have the style of. So it could be a Van Gogh self-portrait, or it could be something out of some fancy movie, just a still shot. And it will then redo your video in that style. So you've just created this whole movie without any of all of that CGI stuff that they've needed, because it's done it for you. Incredible. Still at demo stage, can't buy into that yet, but that's being done now.
Well, there's the whole fake voice thing as well, isn't there?
Yeah, that's scary. Where do you go with ethics on that? Pretending to be someone else.
So
there's loads more, and I'm really keen to see in 3 months' time what version 2 of this podcast looks like. But I want to close out on our early attempts at doing our own version, not using a commercial product. But we've developed a piece of software. Now it's still very much in, I would say, alpha release, not yet a beta, but it works. And it's a machine learning version rather than deep AI. It's taking lots of data and working lots of stuff. But because we use HubSpot, we plugged it into that, didn't we?
Yeah. Plugged it in, and it's around sales forecasting. That's an issue that many businesses have. How do you get an accurate forecast? There's all sorts of reasons why you would want an accurate forecast, and there's all sorts of reasons why it's quite difficult to get an accurate forecast. So by training a model using machine learning to look at what factors influence a deal closing, trying to come up with a way of forecasting more robustly.
And even without preparing the data beforehand, we were getting 80% accuracy levels on the training data. And what we learned actually is that if you collect more data than naturally exists, so you capture certain moments in time, for example, and you freeze that data rather than letting it be overwritten. So you've got a record of how a deal progressed on all sorts of counts. What stage in the pipeline was it at? How old is it? How many emails have there been? Has there been a call yet? Who contacted you and all that sort of thing? How did they qualify? If you capture more information, then it is really very accurate, very powerful. So there we go. Already, we were doing that a year ago.
Way ahead of our time.
And now all of this has come along. So there you go. That's a whistle-stop tour of just scratching the surface, really. And if nothing else, our intention today was to raise awareness for those that have maybe heard about it or read it in the paper and don't know much about it. This isn't just a plaything. This is already being applied usefully in businesses.
Yep.
Scary stuff.
Tinfoil hats at the ready.
Okay, you've been listening to the SME Growth Podcast, talking about artificial intelligence today. Please like us, subscribe, follow on wherever it is that you get your podcasts from, and more importantly, tell your business friends and colleagues to give us a listen. Tell them it's worthwhile. There's lots of different subjects we're talking about. And more importantly, good luck with your businesses as you go forward. And tune in next week. Bye now.